The scientific revolution starts now.
The Deep is the Sci-Fi Podcast.
Let us see in the dark.
So we have some friends who have found a lot of utility in this, would you call it a worldview, a way of looking at the universe?
Philosophy?
Philosophy.
Yeah, how would you describe non-duality?
Well, I mean, we can talk about it in concepts, which is what you do when you're having a conversation. It's a bunch of concepts, but it's actually pointing to something that can't be, limited by concept. It's not in a conceptual reality.
So, and that's kind of the whole point of it, right? Is that you don't divorce the subject from the object, from like everything being entirely connected. You can't get outside of it, something like that.
Absolutely. It's not connected, though. It's just not separate. So it's not separate and then connected.
I see.
Everything is also, so all appearance is also that which can't be known.
And this has its roots all over the place, right? This philosophy. I guess the East is probably the most prolific adopter, but you also see this in Christian mystics and in Kabbalic Judaism, and I don't know, probably lots of other places that I'm not aware of.
Yeah.
But is it the same concept as monism, that everything is one? Is that the same basic idea?
No. I mean, you can't. It's, the philosophy or the idea isn't really to be confined by a term. It's pointing to something that's even beyond experience. It can't be known. So what I talk about basically speaks to the deepest longing in everyone, and that is the end of the experience of separation. And that isn't an experience. It's outside of experience, or contains all experience.
Yeah, so maybe before we get too deep into this, you could just introduce yourself to our audience and tell us a little bit about what drove you into this I don't know, we don't have a word for it yet, this philosophy, this approach to life. Yeah.
It's neither one of those. So one thing that becomes obvious when the experience of separation ends is the story of the individual, and what it did is just a story. It never really happens. So there's no value in the story, and there's no story that leads to the end of the story. So there is no story about how I got to this. There is no, I mean, I could tell you a story. As a kid, I was always interested, but only retrospectively is it clear that freedom was a real motivator. And of course, as a separate individual, nothing can be done in that separate reality except to objectify everything. It lives in an objectified reality. And so I was looking for a freedom for myself.
Like the voice that's inside of you? Because I mean, I always have a hard time with philosophical discussions because it's hard to get people to really specify what they mean. And I come from a scientific background, and so I need to be able to get handles on, in order for me to understand something and to be able to grasp it, I need to put handles on it to be able to follow it. And so when you say freedom from yourself,
for myself, that's the objectified reality. Yeah. It was a freedom, so anarchy, and being an anarchist was sort of a part of the story of Jim as an idea of what freedom would look like.
I had a similar experience.
Yeah.
And so now, do you still see yourself as someone who tries to seek freedom?
No. It's the revelation is that everything is already free. That there is no freedom for the individual. The individual will always be trapped by looking for something. And that looking for something hides the reality that everything is already free. This is freedom. That's all there is.
Well, there are varying degrees, right? Like somebody who's trapped in an
Yeah.
abusive relationship or like locked in a basement is having a different experience than somebody who's, drinking
Yeah.
coffee and eating a croissant.
Yeah. Yeah. Right. So all of that is, everything is an appearance of freedom. Everything is already that freedom. Like I was saying at the beginning, it isn't a freedom that's confined to experience, to an objectified reality. That's not real freedom. Real freedom, what we're talking about, can't be known. So as far as getting a hold of it, that's going to be a real difficult thing, because that's kind of what the whole message points to, is the whole experience of being able to hold on to anything is a dream, which
Well,
becomes very obvious when the body dies.
well, that's definitely true.
Yeah.
But I think that in the meantime, it's like, okay, so one of the problems that I have with non-dualism, and I suppose it's unfair to start with problems,
That's all
but
right.
I hope you'll forgive me.
Well, just to give you some context, can I just interject something really quick? Yesterday, we were hanging out with a Jungian psychologist, and it's all about the story,
Yes.
right?
Yeah.
And so that's kind of where our mindset was yesterday, and we were processing how the individual builds a story that's useful to them, essentially. And useful, by what I mean is it gives them purpose in the universe. It's a functional cosmology, and we were talking about the ways in which modern society sort of doesn't have these functional personal cosmologies so much.
And there's a certain amount of yearning towards something that is very human, right? Like you will always yearn. This is the hedonic treadmill. You want something, you get it, you want something else, you get that else, and then you always want something new. And so, and we've also talked a lot about the idea of addiction in context of psychology, right? Which is that you see people who have trouble finding meaning in the world turning to substances that provide meaning. And to me, it feels like having a story in which you can cast yourself as a person of a specific type who does things a certain way allows you to give a structural frame to this thing that you can't put handles on. Like philosophically or cosmologically, I think that I agree deeply with non-duality. There is stuff, and everything arises from the stuff that there is. You can call it energy, you can call it matter, whatever you want to call it. We are all of the same form. And the divisions...
And that any attempt to apprehend that objectively fails in some way, right? All theories have their limits.
And I was talking to Claudia actually the other day, and she brought this up, and I started to think about it in context of time. Right? She's like, so there's no separation between me and the rock. And I'm like, that's absolutely correct if you stretch and compress time, right? Because the rock once was, or you were once the rock, in the sense that you live on a planet where the rocks are breathed by bacteria who atom by atom take them apart, and then they die, and then they turn into the raw material for something else. And it's this iterative process by which the earth becomes you, and then you go back into the earth. And so the only thing that separates you from the rock is time. And so I have no fundamental issues with any of that. I guess the problem that I have is that it seems like you need to have handles on life in order to be able to bear the difficulty of it.
Right. I get it. You talked about yearning at the beginning. And what's obvious here is that all yearning is for the end of the experience of separation. As long as there's that experience, there'll be the experience that there needs to be, that there is an experience of, that there's volition, that there is an individual that has a life that has to be navigated, and that it's your responsibility. And that comes with an experience of it having meaning and purpose. It being
hopefully. But that's the thing is, I think for a lot of people in modern society, it's not, right? They're not able, like, that's a huge issue right now. You know, you've heard about the crisis of meaning and so forth, and the loneliness crisis and all of these things. Modernity seems to have stripped people of that easy, obvious pillar of meaning that they can attach themselves to. They're like, I sit and I program all day, or, you know, I do podcasts or whatever you do, but not necessarily finding purpose, genuine purpose. It's easy for us because we have a podcast, and we get to explore the universe. But I feel like a lot of people are hurting because they feel like they got to make rent. They're working some job they don't care about, and there just seems to be no hope they're going to own a house someday or do anything. And it's a place that needs stories, good stories that actually lead people forward.
So I don't agree.
That's excellent, and I hope that we can have a conversation, because I hope that we can have a conversation around the non-agreement and see if we can evolve something new from it. That would be the ideal outcome of this experience for me.
So what's been seen here is that there is actually no individual. It's a story, and in that story, the experience of meaning and purpose is part and parcel of it. But it is an illusion. There is no separation. The individual is the experience of separation, and that's an illusion. And yeah, in the story of the individual, there seems to be a need of meaning and purpose. There seems to be a need to get a handle on life, because there's the experience is, I have a life. That's the experience of separation, is owning or having things. I have something. And what's been seen here is that's all illusory. It's illusory. There is no separation. The experience that something needs to be found is a part of that separation. And the problem for the individual is what's longed for is already. Can't be objectified, can't be experienced.
The simplest way that I can put that is that I know that I want stuff, and occasionally I will put myself into a mindset where I believe that if I get the thing that I want, something will be better. I will be somehow different by having achieved, and in the process of having achieved, I will resolve some tension within myself. In my more sober moments, I realize that that is an absolute impossibility, because the thing inside of me that is displeased or dissatisfied or disgruntled will still be there after the achievement. There is this awareness of the world and the processing through my own sensory apparatus that is the thing that would be best gotten away from. And so but given
achievement's
that
awesome.
but right, like I want to leave the world better than it was when I came into it.
Mm-hmm. The discontent fundamentally is the experience of separation. All other drives that come out of that experience of separation are an effort to mitigate that experience. And nothing ever really works like you just described. It's satisfactory. It works for a little bit. And what's longed for is fulfillment.
Well, I think that it is possible to find fulfillment. Oh, go ahead.
No, not really. No, there is no fulfillment for that experience of separation. It's always temporary.
Doesn't achievement make you feel less separated from the universe?
It is definitely temporary. I will agree that it's absolutely temporary, because it's not like you achieve something and then you're like, I have achieved. This is the last achievement.
No, but becoming a person that achieves things regularly.
Still temporary.
It's temporary in the way that, like, a ball rolling down a hill is only temporarily in one place. Right?
It's temporary in that nothing can fulfill that experience of separation.
The experience of separation, do you mean...
It's always discontent.
Do you mean is the experience of separation just being alive rather than being dead?
In a sense, yeah, but so I'm dead. The individual, the sense of I am, is the experience of separation.
The sense of the individual is the sense. Okay, so I see this as kind of, if there is a material that is, or we're scientists,
it's not
so we always.
material,
I know it's not material.
So, okay.
But so, do you know Don Hoffman's work?
I do.
Okay, so Don Hoffman, I think, has a good handle on this, because he has the mathematical...
But he doesn't know what I'm talking about.
No, probably not. But I think that his model of conscious agents and how individual conscious agents come together to sum into a larger conscious agent, and then progressively there is a single whole conscious agent, is maybe a decent mathematical approximation. Agree or disagree?
No. Oh, I disagree. Unfortunately, we're not going to find a lot of analogies to what I'm talking about, because what I'm talking about can't be contained in a philosophy or a concept or a theory or even experience. It's not in experience.
So so then my next question as a scientist is, what is the pull towards something that cannot be described or discussed or contained or understood, right? Because like non-duality.
Isn't there a lot of pain in not being able to understand something?
Yeah, I experienced tremendous
Reminds me of that Stevie Wonder song, Superstition. It's like, try to understand, you try to, when you believe in something you can't understand, you suffer. Superstition ain't the way.
Yeah. And for me, I guess if you wanted a story, that's kind of what Jim's story was. He fell in love with something he couldn't understand and died.
What was the thing that you couldn't understand?
What we're talking about.
And what does it mean that you died?
It means that the I am no longer happens here.
So you never want things?
Well, the body does.
Okay.
But there isn't any sort of wanting out of a need to become something, a need for a better experience. But there's enjoyment. So there's an enjoyment with hiking or chopping wood or any of those things. But there isn't something for that separate experience. All of those movements are imbued with the idea or the experience that it's going to lead to fulfillment, that there's something missing in the experience itself. That doesn't happen here.
But you're still driven towards things like hiking, and you want to improve your situation. If you enjoy hiking or chopping wood, you probably want to do more of it, right?
Do you burn the wood after you chop it, or do you just chop the wood?
No, I'm holy. I chop it and give it away to poor.
I mean, yeah, that's it. It changes it, right?
That was a joke.
But it changes it because I can imagine somebody who just chops the wood and gives it away because they've gotten to this point where maybe they have central heating. Do you know what I mean? Okay, so there's the experience. Charlotte, what were you saying?
Oh, I was just saying motivations, right? I mean, a lot of all right, let me back this up a little bit. I think the value of the mythologization of the self and the Jungian perspective, and let's say the construction of these stories for ourselves, this I and who the I is with respect to the universe, our cosmology. The value of that is that it puts us on track to achieve more wood chopping or more hikes in the woods or whatever it is that makes us, that we enjoy, let's say. And so it seems like, while I agree with you that the universe by definition is everything and it is one and unified in some sense, however we want to approach that, it seems like the illusion of distinction of separate bodies with, and particularly living beings with separate agendas, that's a very functional illusion. Hey, I hope you're enjoying this somewhat bizarre edition of the Demystify Sci podcast, where we're pitting thinking against non-thinking and existence versus non-existence and God knows whatever else. If you want to help us develop this project even deeper, please come over to patreon.com. We really need your help to support us. Patreon.com/demystifysci. We need to keep the lights on. We need to grow this project. We need your input. And we get together with our patrons every week on Sundays and chop it up about how to make this project better. If you don't have any money to join us there, and really you can just give a couple dollars a month, whatever you have, 50 cents, you can type in your own amount if you want to. If you can't do that, maybe there's something else you can do. Maybe you have some skills you can contribute. We're always looking for volunteers to improve the show and improve our exploration of nature. Otherwise, please come over to Discord, come over to Facebook, leave a comment down below, get in touch, and let's go explore nature.
Oh, yeah. Well, this recognizes that as another body.
Mm-hmm.
That all still works. There just isn't anyone in here claiming to know that or is having that experience.
Can you clarify that? I don't follow. I have a really, Shiloh always laughs at me because I have a really hard time with non-reference pronouns. And so he'll be talking, he'll be saying a sentence that somebody else can understand, but he uses the word that to refer to something that happened 2 sentences ago. And I'm like, I have no idea what you're saying.
So when I say that, it's the reason it's a non-reference pronoun is because it doesn't reference a thing. We're not going to get around that. I mean, we could call it God, but then that makes it sound like a thing, and it's not that. It's a non-reference pronoun. It's something we can't get beyond.
Oh, it's really interesting because I feel like the ancient peoples understood this to some extent because they tried really hard not to use the word God, right? I'm thinking of particularly the Judeo-Christian traditions, but others as well. They'll write some unspeakable word essentially to stand in because they realize that it's totalizing in a sense that you don't want to mistake it for a thing, right? And I think one of the biggest tragedies of, friends I have that are deeply religious is that not all of them, but sometimes they can miss the point of the practice because they're obsessed with the superstitious thing. And that can become disastrous in a sense.
So with the chopping of water, with the chopping of wood and the carrying of water.
Yeah.
And it sounds like you're referencing what I've heard referred to as the yoga of living.
Okay. So yoga just means union.
Yes, and so in the moment of the chopping of wood, there is not a calculated aspiration towards something else. It is just the experience of the chopping of the wood and the experience of the carrying of the water for the experience in and of itself.
Well, it's not for anything. That's the freedom. The freedom is that nothing is for anything. It is the wholeness of everything seeming to happen. This conversation, whatever's happening, is that wholeness or that freedom seeming to happen. It's very simple. I know it's you can't get a hold of it because it's not an object, but it's incredibly simple. All I say is that everything is nothing, or everything is that which can't be known, and there is no one that ever finds that. But it is what everybody yearns for. Every separate experience yearns for the end of separation or the revelation that everything is already done. It's already that. And what's left is that apparently happening. So nothing really happens in the end because everything is just a form of that which can't be known, apparently happening, seeming to happen.
What's
like this conversation?
Do you think that that's disempowering?
No, well, not for anyone. No, I understand how the individual has the experience of being in control of its life, of having volition. That's just part of the illusion. There is no one with volition. Free will is an illusion. You're a scientist. You'll probably know that if you've studied neuroscience, that free will is an illusion.
Well,
there are people out there now who are saying there's limited free will, but that's a bit silly, really.
But there,
like
but I mean,
jail. Sorry.
Well, yeah, I mean, you do look. I've had points in my life where I didn't think that I had so much freedom, right? So much free will, but I realized that was an illusion, and that if I made discrete steps and changed things, as painful as it might have been, that I could improve my circumstances.
But no one did that.
It seems beside the point. Like, the fact that I believed that I made those changes was functionally equivalent to there being a person who did that. And so the outcome was still that I took volitional control of, like, I got really obsessed with Ayn Rand in my mid-20s, right? Objectivism and just the hero of that story, the Fountainhead. I was just like, yeah, that's me. I'm going to be that guy. Like, how many young artists went through this, right? But it was really powerful for me. And I'm not really like I'm not any ism. I'm not really subscribing to any one of these things at this point. But it was really empowering to me to realize that I could actually get a hold of myself and make myself into something more than just a 20-something rock and roller or whatever.
Yeah, because I'm like, look, we all have a life to live, right?
That's the dream.
I mean, whether or not we are separated from the that, and so we live.
No, there isn't any separation from the that.
Wait, but hold on a second. You said earlier that there was, that this is all
No, there's the illusion of separation.
the illusion of, okay,
yeah,
sorry.
The
So,
belief
but
that.
I would say that life is the illusion of separation.
Well, my life is the illusion of separation. If there's no illusion of separation, there's just, you could call it life happening.
Okay, so life happening without the biological drive of yearning and accomplishing, then there's...
That's not, sorry, I just so that we get a little bit more clarity.
Yeah.
That's not actually what I said. I didn't say that there wasn't biological drive. Now, for accomplishment, not necessarily. Yearning, if we want to differentiate, for me, yearning has to do with a deeper sense of separation. Wanting would be something that comes from the individual. And so the wanting doesn't happen here. But the biological drive still happens. This goes to the toilet in the morning and eats food and drinks water and all that sort of thing.
But I think the biological drive of humans is to build empires.
Right. Well, that might be true. There might be an interest in building empires or doing those things, but it won't be with a need of overcoming that discontent that you spoke about earlier.
It won't be without, or?
With. It won't have that need in it.
But I think that is the goal of building an empire, is to, I think that Alexander the Great conquered the known world because he was driven by wanting to fill that space.
Oh, maybe that's where religion comes from. Yeah, could be, but it's temporary.
It is right. I mean, at some point he stops conquering and then he does. Right. It's so there's this, but you look at that and you're like, okay, would it have been better for him to disconnect from those drives?
Yeah. Well, so what I would say to that is there isn't anything that's better or worse. That arises in the separate experience, that the idea, part of the idea or the experience of separation is that the appearance, or the world as you call it, is somehow in need of becoming, and the individual has a sense that it is a part of that becoming. As far as this is concerned, that's just part of the illusion. There isn't anything actually becoming, because everything is already that.
Well, it is becoming because, okay, so systems evolve, right?
Apparently.
So a system that is, I mean, from the perspective of...
They unfold, right? A story unfolds of a people, apparently, of a biological entity. Apparently, it seems to.
Yeah, it seems to. But the reason I say it seems to, or apparently, is because nothing is actually happening, because everything is that. Everything is that which can't be known.
But this is a relativistic argument, because if you're standing outside of the that and you're looking at the that and you're like, the that is not changing because you're already looking at the entire whole of it. But then if you go down to a point in the that, where once you're at a point inside of the that, you're looking around and there's all these things that are relative to you and they change. And as they change relatively to you, they're still part of the that, but they are no longer in the same configuration that they were in moments before. And so there is change.
Well, what I'm saying is there is nothing that isn't what we're now calling the that.
But the that is not a single piece. It must be made of many small pieces assembled.
No. It is what everything is. Everything is that. The microphone, the breathing, the eyes, everything, the words, everything is that. It's just that already.
But why do they look different?
Well, that can look like anything, can be anything.
Well, so if
it's free,
so
it's freedom.
So if we're going, of course, so it's something that can look many different ways and yet still be the same thing. And my point is that in order for that to be the case, there is objective change, because that has taken a different confirmation relative to me, and I have taken a different confirmation relative to it.
And it's all still that.
Of course, right? So it's like,
but like somebody had to put a lot of effort into shaping the atoms into that microphone, right?
Yeah. And so like I wonder, like I've always wondered if the roots of non-duality have to do with a time in history where there was a lot of poverty and hunger, and the ruling class came up with a philosophy that prevented people from standing up to the terrible conditions in which they lived.
Oh, that's interesting that both of you have come up with it being as disempowering.
I find it incredibly disempowering because I'm like, the way to achieve something in the world is to plant yourself and then to change things around you. And if nothing can be changed and everything already is, and there's no free will, then there's no chance that you can change anything.
It's interesting how you have to change what I'm saying for your arguments, because I didn't say nothing changes. I say everything apparently changes. So in that sense, in your world, it all has value because the individual is looking for value because it feels like something's been lost. And what I'm suggesting is that nothing has value. It's already fulfilled.
So but if nothing has value, but it is already fulfilled, then it has value.
Oh, well, no.
Why? Because I mean, like, value is fulfillment, right? And so if it is fulfilled, then it is
Well,
value.
then let's use a different word. Everything is already whole. It doesn't have any value. The value is what we were talking about. It's exactly how you describe it. Trying to find something in the world that has value or creating something for value. And where this comes from is the recognition that need comes out of the experience, it fundamentally comes out of the experience of separation.
But the experience of separation is
the experience that someone is sitting in that chair. That's the experience of separation.
Do you not?
But is that a bad thing? That's what I'm having a hard time with. It's
not
like,
at all.
Yeah, because it doesn't seem like a bad thing.
No.
And it seems like taking control. Like, you can say that it's an illusion of that I have a self and stuff, but the fact of the matter is that there is a material representation of reality that is apparent, and that my actions affect that material reality. And so in a sense, I can build my own dream by making moves in this material universe and living in a certain way. And I find that to be really empowering because I have the ability to change my circumstances. When I feel bad, I can change that.
Part of the experience of separation or the individual is one of being in control.
And a lack of control puts you at the mercy of others, right? Of the that. Because the that
there's no mercy to the that because everything is that.
I would say just at the mercy of other individuals. We could just stop there because, if
the other individuals are just different iterations of the that. They're different appearances of the that.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, so
but they can be terribly abusive and torturous.
That's what I mean. So the other. So you have to find. Go ahead. You were getting somewhere.
No. I mean, I guess I'm trying to reconcile two things. I want to understand like the functional utility of this approach, but moreover, but you've dedicated your life to it.
I have not. There isn't anyone here with a life.
Oh, come on. I mean, you're out there.
The appearance of you has dedicated its.
Well, I mean, it's what happens, but no one is dedicated to it. There's no need to do this. There's no sense here that anything is really being done.
And yet you put on your shirt in the morning and you sign into Zoom and you have a conversation and you're out there on the internet talking about these things, right? Like you must have some sense of purpose in those actions.
I know, that's the interesting thing. As long as there's an individual, the assumption is there's an individual everywhere else. It has to be that way. It's incomprehensible that there isn't anyone here with any intention to make anything happen.
But why don't you just lie in bed all day?
Apparently happens on its own for no reason. Just freedom apparently happening.
But why don't you just lie in bed all day and eat like bonbons?
Well, who knows? That might happen.
Sure, but not every day.
Well, who knows? It might happen.
Well, has it?
I can't remember that. There has been lying in bed. There has been lying in bed. I think part of the misunderstanding here is the experience of volition, that there is someone that's actually in control of their lives.
Do we have a misunderstanding? Because it sounds like, I don't think we do. I mean, it seems like you're saying what the subject matter is not understandable.
Yeah.
So I don't think we really have a misunderstanding.
The concept, I think there is a misunderstanding. I think I don't think it's been understood yet that there is no free will, or at least that's what's being suggested, that the individual is an illusion, that free will and choice or meaning and purpose are all part of that illusion, and that illusion engenders a sense of longing or yearning to be whole again. That's what, the story of Adam and Eve is about, being cast out from the Garden of Eden, to be whole again. And that wholeness isn't going to be found in achievement or becoming or having the sense of empowerment. Wholeness can't be found. It is already everything. In the sense that it needs to be found is just another part of the illusion.
But it's such a wonderful illusion. I mean, it feels great to achieve understanding, to comprehend how the material universe functions, to be able to work within it, to be able to move yourself from burnt out basements into a healthy marriage, to these things are actually functional, whether or not, like, I'm willing to work with the idea that it's an illusion. That's totally fine by me. But it seems like a very wonderful, magical, beautiful illusion that I have control over to something. Like, I could get hit by a bus walking down the street later, but, I do have a lot of control over that dream in the meantime.
Well, there's nothing here that's trying to disabuse anyone of any ideas or beliefs.
I think that we're just seeking to understand. The whole point of our project is to understand what these ideas mean and how they play out in the world, and to try them on. And it's interesting because my best friend is really into non-dualism.
When you say that, I wonder what you mean, because the way I talk about it is different than a lot of others. So what you'll notice in what I talk about, it doesn't even acknowledge a separate individual as real. It only acknowledges it as illusory, without volition. So there aren't any suggestions to that individual of what to do or how to be. Most, as far as I can tell, teachers always have a suggestion of what you should do to find the end of separation. To me, that's a non sequitur. If there isn't any separation, then who is going to find it and who's going to recognize it?
So she goes to this guy's house in San Diego. His name is Francis
Lucille?
I think so, yeah.
Yeah.
And
so he's a teacher, and he will tell you what you need to do.
I see. And so you don't see yourself as a teacher?
Well, there isn't anyone to teach, and there isn't anything to teach. Like I said before, there's no intention here to change anything. I can't get away from the word, but it's obviously already perfect. There is no need for there to be the end of an illusion or there to be an illusion of separation. It makes no difference to the whole of everything. It makes no difference whatsoever. So there's no intention here to change that.
Oh, people seek you out for something.
Oh, yeah, they do. And if they're looking for something, then they don't stay long, because there isn't anything to get. It's one of the few messages out there that offer absolutely nothing to the individual. And
so who stays around?
Yeah, I guess people, it was a little, what do you say, all or nothing. Most that come are a little in between. There's still something there that might be seeking something. And there might be an energy or a recognition that what's truly longed for isn't a something that they can find.
And how do their lives change after they find you?
I don't know.
Do you speak to them?
Yeah, they call me on the phone. Yeah. A lot of people, it's all very varied, just like the folks that show up, it's very varied.
Sure.
From rich business people to people who are in communes. So the whole bandwidth is there, and some people, it can be kind of devastating, and some people seem to feel a sort of a freedom in it.
What you're communicating is an understanding, though, is it not? What we're attempting to talk about.
Well, that happens. Understanding happens, but it's limited. It's not really, what it's about. Although even understanding what I'm talking about can give a sense of relaxation or ease about the need to become, but it's still limited.
This is wild. So, do you ever watch Batman or read the comic books when you were growing up? I feel like I'm facing off with the Riddler right now.
Yeah.
Like, my God, that's a good one.
Oh.
So, okay, take us through. Do you have an interior landscape?
An interior landscape. There's feelings and thoughts. Is that what you mean?
Sure, and not just feelings and thoughts, but I think also your relation to them.
Oh, well, there isn't one.
So there's the distant observation.
No, there is no observation or no observer.
So
no registrar.
You have a feeling.
Well, there are feelings, but no one has them. And it's true there too, that no one actually has feelings.
Do you
There's
experience
just feelings
them?
arise. There's no one to experience them, but they arise.
So what is the process by which you know that there is a feeling?
It's just that I guess the brain identifies feelings, says, ooh, that's whatever.
Do you feel it in your body?
Yeah, I don't feel it, but it's in the body. That's where feelings arise.
Okay, so the feeling is mapped out by the relationship of the brain and the body, and then it is and it is perceived as something inside of as a thought.
As a thought or in the feeling, yeah.
Okay, so then what next? Let's say it's an unpleasant feeling.
Yeah.
What next?
That's just the way it is. That's just what happens.
What if it's an unpleasant feeling because your hand is on? Let's say no. That's too simple. Let's say what if it's an unpleasant?
But it's the same thing.
It is the same thing. It is the same thing. But it's too easy. It's too easy. It's the
same thing, but it's the same answer.
I know, but let's play.
Don't you think that the role of feelings is to orient you towards a better situation?
Oh, I think definitely there you could call them a messenger of sorts. Yeah.
Okay. So
and a huge task of modern psychology is unnumbing people to their feelings so they can reorient themselves to a better existence.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, have you heard about why they think SSRIs work? Was it you who told me this?
No.
Well, so SSRIs appear to work not because they make people less depressed, but they appear to work because they just numb people across the board. Everything from their pain sensation to their pleasure sensation is dulled. That's why people have so much sexual dysfunction when they take them. I think you told me.
No, I'm aware of that. Yeah.
So
yeah, they work, but they don't know. And there's also there's more to that story too. But what about it?
Well, you were just talking about the numbing of the experience.
Well, there's a lot of pain from that, right? So I think that, look, the reason we have feelings is essentially biological, but all that bio means is life, right? And so they have a role, whether you call it spirits or biology or whatever you want. The way I see it is that the biologists have essentially taken the concept of spirit and they've given it fancy multi-syllabic words like evolutionary processes or something, right? But it's still some animating force that's driving things forward, right? And we're all subject to those, and they can serve us if we pay attention to them. And so to say that you don't have feelings or you are not there having, how does...
I think that it is denying yourself, denying the god of anger its right to possess you. I think that that's right, because it goes both ways. If you have the feeling has you.
Oh, no.
No.
No, there isn't. No, there's still fear. There's still anger.
But it's like,
anger arises.
It arises.
It just doesn't have anyone.
But if it arises, okay, so if it arises, Shyla, go ahead. I'm out of my depth.
Like I said, I'm just trying to comprehend. I think it would be interesting to unpack our friends' experience with this and what it's done for them, first of all, and why people are drawn to this. But And I guess that's what I'm still circling around, is that Jim has an understanding of the universe. And my question is that a useful understanding of the universe?
No, it's not useful. And it's so understanding, I understand the concepts, I find them quite simple. But where these words are coming from, and there as well, isn't from an understanding. It's that which can't be known speaking.
So if it isn't useful, is it detriment? Is it a detriment?
Well, I don't think it doesn't seem necessarily to be a detriment if it's what's longed for by every experience of separation, the end of seeking. That doesn't sound detrimental. But what it isn't is it isn't useful. It isn't practical.
Is it blissful?
Bliss, I think, is misleading. I think it's misleading. It sounds like a state to be in.
Let's say contentedness?
It's not a state in the end. There isn't a state, which is a continuum of things. But it's what's left when there isn't anyone seeking.
This sounds like trying to define cool.
Oh.
Do you know what I mean by that?
I do, yeah. Well, in a sense, it's like trying to define anything in the end, emotions, or know what someone else is feeling. But we are talking about that which can't be known, and which is most longed for.
Well, it's interesting because I actually have I believe that it's possible to understand what somebody's feeling. I think that it's possible to not just understand what somebody's feeling, but also to understand where the root of that feeling is. And it's possible to explore that and to understand it, and by grasping it, then be able to figure out what to do with it.
Part of the illusion of the separation that the individual has is that it's in a world of we's. But really, the experience of separation is the experience of being absolutely alone. The center of the universe.
I mean, it is aloneness, but it's also, like, I think about this in context of my family. So I grew up in a family that was very, very, very close. Like, we were immigrants from Russia. There were 5 of us in this entire hemisphere. And so we left everybody that we ever knew. My parents left right before the Soviet Union fell apart. So they left thinking that they would never see any of their extended family ever again. And that ended up not being the case because the Soviet Union fell apart. People moved to all these different countries, but we still were the only ones in this hemisphere. And it was a terribly lonely place to grow up in. And it was very separated, and it was very odd because we were immigrants in this place where just like wasn't home. And over the course of my life, I've spent a lot of time figuring out the weirdness of that time and place. And now I think things have changed. But they haven't changed because I didn't work on them. They changed because I spent a tremendous amount of effort teasing apart the various emotional backgrounds of all of the people involved and why they were motivated by the things that they were motivated by. And it's really changed things. But I don't think things would have changed.
All I'm saying is all change is that appearing to change.
Well, yeah, that's changed.
What changes has value, meaning, and purpose.
So, hold on. If the appearance of that changes, then by definition, that must have changed. Because in order to have an appearance... but it's filtered through perception, yeah.
Yeah.
But
it appears to change.
So if the appearance of it has changed, it means that it has changed, because in order to get a new appearance, it must have changed.
Yeah, into a new appearance.
Exactly. So, and we live relationally only interacting with the appearance of the that. And so what I'm saying is that the tracing of a...
interact with the that.
The appearance of the that.
Oh, the appearance.
Yeah. So we're interacting with the appearance of the that, and because we're interacting with the appearance of the that, we actually have a decently large influence on the immediate surroundings of of our immediate surroundings on the appearance of the that. I can choose to be a dick, and the that around me appears to be much less pleasant. I can choose to be really decent and good, and the that all of a sudden rearranges itself to support that. Right?
That's not necessarily true, not fundamentally, because the brain does all of that. The separate experience then comes in and says, I'm being a good person or I'm being a bad person.
You don't think
But
that these...
it's conditioning. It's conditioning and genetics, isn't it?
I actually think that these are fundamental things.
Yeah.
Like, so I studied microbiology, and it's weird because I think that the idea of what it means to be a good microbe is not that different from what it means to be a good human.
You think they think about that?
I do, actually.
Well, okay.
Well, maybe not think, but they experience something like that.
Yeah, like I think that it's not a human consciousness where they're sitting around and they're on Zoom with each other being like, yo, I've figured something out, my Pseudomonas. But I do think that there is a proto-cognition that knows what is good and what is bad, and it's pretty authoritarian. Because when you live in a biofilm, you don't have a lot of free will. You don't have a lot of choice of what it is that you're going to do because you get signals from somewhere else and you're like, oh, the signal means that I have to do this thing. And so it's like there's actually very little freedom at that scale. But I do think that they're encoded with the idea of these are the things that are good because survival is good and we will do these things that are good. And they have all these sensory systems to tell them if they're headed in the wrong direction for survival.
And serving the colony, right?
Yeah.
Which I guess you could boil down to survival, but they're still deeply communal organisms.
Yeah, big time.
Social.
Big time. And so I'm like, I think that even on the level of bacteria, all of these notions of good and bad exist.
Yeah, if you see survival as good, then survival is good and bad. And that's, of course, a relativistic perspective. And what I'm talking about isn't relativistic. Nothing's related because everything is that. But when you get into the relativistic perspective, then you get good and bad and right and wrong, which are very valuable to that separate illusory experience who's trying to be good enough not to suffer anymore, is basically what it is. It's trying to be good enough to have a continuum of better experiences. That's the drive. It's a hopeless effort, but that's the drive.
It's interesting because I see it more as not the search for not suffering, but for knowing that the suffering is for something worthwhile.
Right.
Because
okay,
you
so
will inevitably suffer.
So framing it in a better way then.
Framing it in a way that makes it a burden that is bearable. Because otherwise you go crazy.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, do you believe in the world?
There isn't any beliefs here. I mean, the idea of the world, there's an idea of the world. There isn't anything really out there. But
you operate within it, right?
Well, I don't, but there is operation. Yeah, computers and things.
Your appearance operates within it.
Yeah.
And so actualizing and maximizing your operation within it is a game that's played by everybody.
It either does or doesn't happen, yeah.
And isn't there value in that inherently?
No. There's no need. Value is a personal experience. It's a need to become something better or to find something. And that just doesn't happen here.
And yet it appears to.
Well, not the search for value, but making videos and having Zoom conversation. Yeah, everything appears. It seems to happen. Like chopping wood or whatever else, sleeping.
But there's a way of approaching that is outside of volition.
Well, the suggestion is there is no volition, period. There's an illusion of volition that comes with the experience of separation, but that's just an illusion.
and yet a very functional and actualizable illusion.
Oh, it's not very functional. If you look at the world, it doesn't seem to be very functional.
Oh, I do look at the world. I mean, starting from inside of my own eyeballs and my own actions, and it does seem to be very functional, these volitional choices. I mean, I think that most suffering comes from a lack of people believing that they have the power to change things in their lives.
Oh, right. Okay.
So it seems like the word illusion kind of falls apart when it's an experience that everybody can relate to one another, and we have this universe, right? We all are singing the same song together. We see this tape, like we're in this room, Nasti and I can agree, and my parents who are visiting, if they walked in, they could agree that there's a table here and that we're sitting in this room. We have this shared illusion, and if, to the extent that it's shared by all of us, is it really even useful to think of it as an illusion at that point?
No, there's no value in what I'm talking about. None whatsoever.
And yet, here you are.
Well, only apparently, not me, but this body is here talking about these things.
Why did this appearance come?
To the conversation?
Yeah.
Yeah, you asked.
Do you agree to all asks?
No.
How do you decide?
I don't really. It's not really a volitional thing. It's just I'll look at channels and see, and then there either is a yes or no.
There's a feeling of yes or no.
Yeah.
Okay. So, and
I was a little concerned about this one because you guys are very intellectual, and I thought,
oh, don't call us that. Don't call us that.
Oh, okay. Very scientific. Sorry.
No, we're complete weirdos. I mean, we're artists fundamentally.
Oh, okay, great.
I should stop wearing this jacket. I look too academic. I mean, yeah, we teach at the university. We have science backgrounds, but we also are artists. Like we tour and play music. And
sorry, I didn't realize intellectual was a bad word. I hesitated a little bit because of that, because the conversation as it's going was sort of, expected in a way, because but I thought it would be interesting.
It's very interesting to me because it's like Shiloh said, it's a riddle. But my favorite games when I was a child were. Did you ever play Myst?
I didn't, but I know of it.
This reminds me of Myst a little bit.
But there's nothing hidden. That's the only thing about the game. There's only a movie prize.
Well, so what's interesting is that in Myst, the goal of the game is that you spend the entire time assembling these pages that at the end you assemble into a book, and then you can read the book, and so you tell the whole story. But then you get trapped. I won't spoil it. Never mind. I know it's been 30 years since it came out, but it's still a very good game. But there is this sense as you go through the game, because it's a very complete world. There is the appearance of the vat. You are interacting with the appearance of the vat, and you're getting all of these communiques from different places that are intentionally obscured. And so it is a suspension of linear thought as you play the game, where instead of being able to say the story comes together like this and this is the significance, you simply have to give yourself over to the flow of it and know that it will happen. And so I appreciate this conversation for that. It's very different from the conversations that we usually have, and you're very you're very amiable, and so I appreciate your patience.
Do you have any sense of why your friends were attracted to this understanding of the universe?
Just to be clear, if they're listening to Francis, it has in some ways absolutely no relationship to what we're talking about here. Francis is a teacher, so he gives instructions. It's not nearly as frustrating as having this conversation, because there's a goal and there's an intention and there's an individual that is on a path that will find something. It's much more satisfying to the separate experience to have a teacher than to have this conversation.
And that's why I love it so much, because I think that our friends in San Diego, Brenton and Ollie, are getting something out of it that is very goal directed. I think they both recognize that life is full of suffering. Ollie is Eastern European, and so, like me, he has a deep sense that life is pain and that perhaps you will one day break free of it, but it's unlikely, and that you just have to learn to handle that suffering. And I think that Francis offers a very cosmic, but he's really into quantum physics, and he has stories that he tells. And so I think that they really like it on that basis, because it's basically a frame for thinking about the world that is goal-oriented, that's almost like stoicism in a way, because they've gotten into a big stoicism kick lately. They run like the Daily Stoic now, which is like they talk about stoicism on a daily basis. And so the spirit is a desire, they have a desire to be able to bear the difficulty of life with dignity. And I think that that's what attracts them. Is that often what attracts people to non-dualism?
Well, to teachings, yeah. The individual is basically lost. It basically doesn't know what this is about. And so it comes up with belief systems and ideas. It doesn't do that. It's just a function of the separation, is coming up with beliefs and ideas about what it's about. And one reason it goes to teachers is because they'll tell you what you should do. They'll say, I've found the answer, and I can tell you how to find it.
How do you spend your time with your friends?
Oh, we don't talk about this. Not unless they ask.
Oh, so, okay, what do you do?
That's fascinating. That's really fascinating.
Because Shiloh and I can't get, I mean, if you invite Shiloh and me to a party, the stuff that we do for work is literally the only thing that we talk about.
Oh, right. No, what's really free about this is there is no proselytization. There is nothing to tell anyone. There's just no need for anything in particular to happen. There's no drive to share this or to change anything at all. There's a response if there's a question, like there was a request to come on the podcast. There's a response that just happens. There's a joy in talking about it, but there isn't any drive to tell anyone anything.
I don't necessarily have the drive to tell anyone anything. It's more that these are the things that I spend all of my time thinking about, right? I
guess we're more of explorers, right? If we go to a party, we're actually just exploring what people think about things.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
I mean, that's what this podcast is too. I mean, it looks like a podcast, but really we're just trying to meet interesting people and hang out and explore the universe, right?
And so when you do hang out with your friends, what do you guys do?
Hike, go to dinner.
And what do you talk about? Like, what are your...
It's very ordinary.
Do you have pets?
4 cats.
Yeah.
We too are cat people.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. So,
do you think your cats are closer to this understanding than human beings?
Oh, absolutely. I don't mean to be pedantic, but it's not an understanding, and they are it. That's why they can sit there for hours in contentment, looking out the window or at the wall.
Yeah, I've often looked upon my cat with envy at her.
Yes.
I mean, she's the happiest cat I've ever heard of. Like, she just sits there purring all day long, just super stoked, whatever's happening. She loves people being around, but she doesn't really want to be up in their business. Just kind of likes being in the room if people are hanging out. Just so happy all the time. It must be nice.
Shiloh always says that he wants to come back as Mingus.
Yes.
So so you mentioned Adam and Eve, and you mentioned this expulsion from the garden. And Shiloh, one time we were on a hike, and he just stopped in the middle of the trail and was like, I think that the moment of the expulsion from the garden is a metaphor for the departure of the human from the animal.
Oh, in a sense, yeah. Well, from the innocence of the animal. So in the Garden of Eden, of course, they eat from the tree of knowing or knowledge, which is the experience I am. I am begins with the experience of knowing. And that knowing brings about a sense of shame or of vulnerability or of exposure. And then they have to put on personalities or clothes, as they call it. And then they're cast out of the Garden of Eden. And they ever after yearning for the back to the Garden of Eden. That's where the cat lives. And that's where this message comes from.
Man, it's such a brilliant insight for some 10,000, 4,000, 5,000-year-old people to put down on a piece of paper.
Well, I actually, my assumption is that this insight, this revelation is not that rare. It's just there's nothing to say to anyone about it. There's no, as I was telling you, there's no drive. There's no proselytization.
Well, the Bible, I think, makes the case, if I can summarize an incredibly complex work, that there is a way back.
Most religions, all religions, it couldn't be a religion unless it was suggesting a path for someone. Absolutely.
And that's the reason that religions are so freaky, because what they do is and I say this in an irreverent way, but what they're doing is they are harnessing the deepest urge that anyone has, which is to crawl back into the womb and saying, we can give you that.
That's right.
Here's a book.
That's what spirituality, that's all spirituality as well. All spiritual teachers are saying, I can show you the way back to the womb, back to wholeness.
And that just makes me cringe a little bit. Like, I had a really hard time going to Francis's house, honestly. I got in a big argument with him about mathematical physics. But I just have a hard time with spiritual teachers in general, because I feel like this is an internal thing that must be experienced from within on one's own journey. And offering that to somebody just feels a little scoundrelly to me.
Well, it's not. I know I keep going back to the same things, but it's not an experience. If it were, there would be a path. It would be an objectifiable experience that someone would have.
There's a path from birth to death, though.
Apparent. There's no real path, because everything is that.
Oh, well, so it's like, okay, we go to the river, and you can sit at the edge of the river, and you see the way the water pours through a narrow opening, and it forms a vortex, and the vortex travels along the surface of the water, and then it dissipates. Yeah. There is still a vortex. It is apparent in the water.
So the situation for the separate experience is that the appearance is real. It's the only thing that matters. That's all it has, is what appears. And its life is trying to manipulate, modulate, tinker with the appearance, trying to have a better experience, whatever that might be. And where this is coming from is that the appearance is not actually real. It's not an illusion. It's an appearance. It is apparent. It is. This isn't denying that. But it is simultaneously that which can't be known. So in that sense, although the vortex moves down the river, it's only nothing, or that which can't be known, appearing to move. So nothing actually happened.
Can we talk about real versus apparent?
Yeah, well, the real is objectified. The sense of the individual is that I am real. I know I am. I know I'm real. And so its entire experience is one of that reality. Because I am real, all of my perceptions are real, everything that's happening is real. It's a divided reality. It's divided from nothing, or that which can't be known. It's divided from that. And in the end, although the individual can only seek a better experience in that dream reality, what's longed for, but not by the individual, is union, wholeness with what can't be known, which it already is, which is the dilemma for that seeking experience. It is what's longed for, but it's hidden from it through its looking for it.
There is a TED Talk by a neuroscientist that had a massive stroke in the left hemisphere of her brain. Have you seen this TED Talk?
I might have heard about it, though.
It is extraordinary because she describes what it was like when her left hemisphere went quiet. And she basically lost the ability to differentiate between herself and everything else.
Yeah. That's similar, but it's not the same thing.
I wish that I could send this to you so you could see it. But why do you say that it's not the same thing?
Just because there isn't a lack of ability to differentiate. It's the recognition that it's the revelation that everything is already that. So
That's the revelation that she had. She
right, okay. Oh, got
she
it.
had this
Got
like massively spiritual revelation that everything was her and she was everything, and that everything was an appearance of that, basically.
Yeah.
To the point that when she came back online, she was basically weeping because she wasn't able to stay there. And as her body was healing, she was coming back into this sense of individuality again, and it was terribly traumatic.
Yeah, it would be. It'd be being cast out of paradise. But the reason I say it's not the same is there is no way for it to be any different. If it's been revealed, or if the individual has melted away, there is nothing that could happen that would change that. There's nothing that could happen. Everything, I don't know how to say, everything is just simply that, whatever appears.
So I think that what it is the left brain is responsible for carving nature at the joints. It is the labeler. It is the categorizer. It is the identifier of lines between things. And so when the left brain goes online, it can no longer reign over the right brain. And the right brain is the one that is the artistic brain that recognizes the appearance.
When it goes offline. You said online, I think.
Offline. When the left brain goes offline. And so when she comes back, her left brain hasn't learned this. And so the reason that she has this traumatic experience is because the left brain comes back online and it is not changed. It has not had the experience. And it is so able to rule over the right brain that it's able to clamp back down on it. But when somebody arrives at this through an analytical way, then it's something that once it has been learned, it cannot be come back from. And so I think that hers is this like purely,
revelatory.
This is how neuroscience often works. They look at people whose brains don't work in order to figure things out. And so it's the revelatory experience comes specifically from the brain function. I don't have a question here.
No.
Delay. What do you think?
Can we,
You want to take a break?
Yeah, can we take a 5-minute break? Do you have time?
Yeah, you bet.
All right,
Excellent.
great. Thank you. I'm going to use the bathroom and gather my thoughts a little bit.
I'll be back in 5 minutes.
Thank you.
Okay, perfect. See you in a minute. It's a very interesting challenge to try to get my mind around something that is intentionally structured to be slippery.
Oh, well, it's not intentionally structured. It's that the experience of ownership is illusory. So the whole is already what you might call slippery. It can't be held on to. And this message is just a reflection of that slipperiness. What's longed for isn't an experience, or knowing, which would be something that could be held on to.
Well, knowing, there's no way for me to transduce things into my experience without knowing.
Oh, totally. And this will never be your experience. It's not an experience here.
It sounds like it's an experience here, though, right? Because it's a reflection upon the appearance of things and the reality of things.
It's a reflection on that the appearance of things is that which can't be known or experienced.
Sure, and so that's a it's a philosophical orientation so the philosophical orientation can be known, but the second order thing that it is an approximation of cannot be known.
That's right.
I can accept that. I mean, but where does that leave us?
Nowhere. The whole idea that you're trying to get somewhere comes out of the sense of being cast out of paradise. That paradise is going to be something you are going to find. Known or unknown, that's what every separate experience is looking for.
Well, so it's really... go ahead. Sorry.
And it can't be found.
Okay, so I have this feeling that there's something different about humans than other animals.
Yeah.
And the distinction requires that we orient ourselves towards something. I think that that is what we are. We are an animal that orients towards something.
Hmm.
The other animal does not know death. The other animal does not know the future. It does not know that the moment tomorrow will be different than the moment today. It has no
Well,
concept.
although animals orient towards something, like whether it's food or whatever, but we're like time machines, right? We can project imaginative futures and reconstruct the meaning of our past in ways that the other animals don't.
Yeah, like a cat. So, okay, a cat can't think of, I'll be hungry tomorrow. The cat really only thinks of, I am hungry now. Because if the cat thought that of, I'll be hungry tomorrow, it would be more like a squirrel where it would save nuts for winter.
Hmm.
Or, bury gopher corpses or whatever it does for later.
Hmm.
And cats don't do that. And so it seems to be a reflection of their atemporality. They live in the moment. They respond to the moment. But humans, like Shiloh said, are time machine species. We live for the future. And that's what's brought us here, right? Because if we get tossed out of the garden, and we know 5,000 years ago that there was a garden that we got tossed out of, we're 5,000 years down the line from the invention of agriculture and the invention of empire and the production of cities. And so it seems like it's almost this yearning to go back to the time before we did all of that, to go back to the garden.
Well, I think there's a misunderstanding going on with the idea that the individual does all of that, that there is volition. So here it seems like the human body, the body would still do research and neuroscience and quantum physics and all of those things, but there wouldn't be the need behind it that the separate dream individual has of trying to find paradise in everything, trying to find something for itself.
Why are there individuals then? Why does it appear to be so?
Well, if for there to be an answer to why, there would have to be a reason for this, and there isn't.
I guess the way I'm looking at it is that the universe, for whatever reason, has shaped all of these different entities, like all of the features of the landscape that I'm looking out upon, regardless of whether they're all one or not. They have features, and the universe seems to have shaped those features.
Mm.
And I'm not even going to argue that there's a reason that it shaped those features, but that those features persist implies that they are purposeful.
Okay. That's not the way it's seen here.
And yet it seems to be the case still, right?
Okay. I mean, a hammer has purpose. That's what you mean. But there is no purpose to the whole of this. It's not actually going anywhere.
Well,
I can see that for sure. I mean, in some eternal universe where things are changing shapes all the time, it's not about the end point. It's about the occurrence itself.
Okay, so I actually see it about the maintenance of something. So life is an event. You can say that life is a separation. You can say that life is the
Let's
appearance
just say apparent
of that.
event.
It is an apparent event. I like that.
Okay. We should just preface everything we say is apparent. We mean apparent.
I know, same here. I should have a big red sign that just flashes
Yeah.
apparent.
Well, no, I love that actually. I mean, it's one thing that I'm always from a physics. Like my background is in physics. I'm really I work in astronomy right now and astrophysics. My PhD was in elastic mechanics, so I'm very physically oriented. And I think it's really important to start every discussion of physics with here is what is apparent. Because that's what we're building the story off of. We're assuming that what is apparent, I'm not even gonna say that it is happening or it isn't happening. It just appears to be, and let's work with that. And now we can actually talk about something. So I really appreciate that. as a preface. I'd slip it in all the time, needlessly. Nastia goes nuts because I'll say these things. I'll start with the parent as well, just because I think it clarifies, so we don't have to argue about whether it is or isn't happening.
Usually, you'll correct me in the middle of a thought, which I think is useful, because you're right that it is not what is. It is the borders of the model. And if you can
it's kind of the starting place, right?
Yeah.
It's like we always start with an apparent phenomenon and then we solve it. That's what observations are in science, right? It's like we're going to inscribe what is apparent and then we're going to explain the cause of what is apparent.
So the apparent phenomenon of life is apparently very rare. Right? At least in our solar system. Like, maybe you can go to Proxima Centauri and find it. Maybe you can go somewhere else and find it. But it appears to be really rare. And so it's hard for me to not see this teeming activity as being a vehicle for propagating the rare activity of life, where the planet is an enormous fruit that will send out seeds. And that we are part of the game of it sending out seeds. And if we don't make it, the cephalopods will rise and the cephalopods will try it. And if they don't make it, one
of the other trillions of galaxies will find a way.
Yeah, maybe it'll be the cetacean. Like we have a time scale, which is the time scale is either for how long this planet stays in orbit of its sun and things remain. That here appears to be able to sustain life for long enough that we can try it and keep going. That will always be there. The question is, will our project make it?
And all this is saying is that maybe, and that it doesn't matter. That which can't be known is the fulfillment which is longed for. So the relevance of whether it does or doesn't is no longer has any value. It doesn't mean that it's then devalued, but it just doesn't have any value at all. It doesn't say it should or it shouldn't happen. It's just saying that nothing actually depends upon it.
Do you ever
the individual?
Do you ever think about yourself as a continuous thread of life all the way back to the very first living organism that ever squirmed upon the surface of the earth?
Well, there is a realization of that in the brain, that all the way back to the beginning of life. The individual is limited to the appearance because for it, it's all there is. And so it really matters. It's not saying that there's anything right or wrong. It's just saying that that's the limitation of the individual, is it's dependent upon the experience that it has. And part of the drive that it has is to make that experience better. And survival is a very fundamental experience, or the basic fear of the individual. And so the idea of continuation is one of its cherished beliefs, whether it be in its life or another life or any of those ideas that it has.
Well, it's like weird because we define life in, I don't like this definition of life, but you can go to a biology textbook and you can ask them, what is life? And they'll give you a list of 7 things. Life is something that maintains homeostasis. Life is something that reproduces. Life is something that has compartmentalized membranes.
I think the most popular one right now is NASA's definition that they labored over, which is like a system that undergoes Darwinian evolution, which is just preposterous because obviously that's just life. That's like a circular argument, essentially.
But my definition has always been about desire and wanting things.
That's the limit of the individual.
Well, it's also, I think, as someone who studied biology, I look at all of life, and that is what life does. Life wants things. Life moves towards things that will allow it to survive and then to make more of itself.
But just as in the cat, that just happens naturally. There doesn't need to be a separate experience.
Are your cats neutered or spayed?
Yeah.
So is ours. And I wonder where I realize that the experience that I have of the cat is an incomplete experience of the cat.
Oh.
Do you know what I mean by that?
I do. For me, it's just another idea of the individual, that there's something better other than what is. There's so for the individual, there's always something missing. And it sounds there as though what's missing is the idea that there's a better experience of a cat that's not neutered because it's complete catness rather than a neutered catness. But a neutered catness, anything that appears, just like the video or the computer that we're looking at, is the whole of it. Its wholeness appearing is everything. So
I can see a lot of value in one aspect of this, which is that there's a constant need.
There is no value in this. You have to.
I know, but I'm going to make some value of it regardless, just because that's the way that I work. I guess I'm a strong egotist. I need value. I need to improve things for myself and for my brothers and sisters. The value that I see is that you really do want to. Okay, there's an increasingly dominant theme in technological civilization that anything humans do is artificial, and that everything else is natural. Like, the word natural drives me up a wall, because essentially in some aspect of what you're saying, I'm hearing that everything is obeying its nature. I know you wouldn't say everything, but everything appears to obey its nature and is a product of its nature. And so humans and everything that's happening and all the things that we do and the spayed animal and so forth are natural in a sense.
I'm not saying that the spayed animal is not natural. What I'm saying is that the spayed animal is a particular relation to human that behaves very differently than an unspayed animal. And I wonder where, if you go 6,000 years ago, how much more interaction did we have with animals that were not domesticated versus now, where I think that all of the animals that I see, including the deer that live in the gardens, seem to be quasi-domesticated. And there's a thing about domestication versus not that changes the appearance of that.
Oh, yeah. And for the individual, there always seems to be something missing. So it will always be looking for a better experience. Whether that's more experience with undomesticated animals, there's always a sense of something not being fulfilled. That's just part of the experience. There's nothing right or wrong with that. It's just the way it appears.
Drugs take this away.
But only temporarily. It's still within experience. I've talked to a lot of people who've done, I don't know all the names of them, but they used to come to the meetings because it sounded very similar to what they were talking about. But it seems to me that it's still within the experience of the individual. There's someone there experiencing that there's no one there. And that's not the way it is here. There isn't anyone here that knows there's no one.
Well, there's two ways of approaching that as far as the drugs go, right? Because there's psychedelic drugs, which do, I think, what we're talking about. But there's also drugs that I think you were trying to talk about, Nastia, the drugs that just make you not care about you're there, you're that, like what's happening.
Yeah, like I see fentanyl as kind of this. How do you categorize? How do I refer to you? Jim? Like that? Can I say you? Do you take you as okay?
Well, for the last hour or so, we've been saying that.
I know, but I just realized that I'm like, that might not be your preference. Is there how, in an ideal world, if someone was referring to you, how would they refer to you?
Well, so as I told you, there's no drive to bring about any change anywhere or make any separate experiences fall away. But there are some times when discussing this, it makes sense to point out that there isn't an individual or there isn't anyone. But it's not practical to try to go around and tell the teller, if she asked if I want a receipt, to say, no, there isn't anyone here that wants a receipt. But the wanting receipt happens, please. There's no need for that.
I would love to see that. Okay, so where would you put drugs like fentanyl and heroin and oxycodone and all these things that erase the experience? And that
are more popular now than ever before.
Yeah.
Yeah, being separate is painful.
Is it more painful now than ever before?
I think in a lot of ways, if you look at the world, it seems to be getting more and more discontent. There seems to be more and more discontent in the world than previously.
Do you have a sense of why that is?
Well, because it's not working. The worst thing that can happen to an individual is that it gets everything at once. Because then it can't explain its discontent and drive to keep going and getting something else, why it's not fulfilled. Because the experience of the individual is that fulfillment is hidden in having enough. It's not hidden in having enough. And people in the world now have more than ever, and it's not working.
That is 1,000% true. But do they have... Yeah, I suppose what they don't have is, especially I'm just thinking about like the kids that I interact with at the university and stuff, they don't seem to even have the level of social connection that we had when I was in college, which, you know, I guess that's getting to be a ways back now. I guess I'm getting old. But there does seem to be an acceleration of this disconnection. But at the same time, they're highly connected through their phones. Like I go into the lecture hall, it's like this big theater. And, you know, when I went to these big theaters in college, everybody's like buzzing and chatting and what were you doing last night? And these kids are all just silent. They're on their screens and there's a whole universe inside of their screens. Like I'm sure they have pals and connections and threads going, but you don't see it in the physical universe anymore. And, you know, that may be all well and good. There's an argument to be made for that. But on the other hand, it doesn't totally seem to be working.
That's a really interesting observation because I would expect that as you move into what you can loosely call the metaverse, you begin to erase the distinctions between yourself and others more and more because you're jacked into something that is not an object. You are in an infosphere and you are it's much easier to see the breakdown of the connections or to see the connections and the breakdown of the separations. But it does seem to be driving people crazy. What do you make of it?
And sad and lonely.
And so I wonder if there isn't something about the necessity of constantly contemplating the separation and finding something meaningful in that separation, right? Because if you lean away from the physical and into the metaphysical, into the metaverse, where you are no longer separate, you are part of this stream of information, then you begin to lose something of yourself. And if you lose something of yourself, it's possible that there's some evolutionary step where the next generation of kids that grows up without the awareness of the separation and is jacked in basically from the crib, maybe they'll be able to adapt to it and have it be less suffering because the body is what creates suffering, right? It's the hunger, it's the hormones.
It's the me. It's easy to die of hunger if there isn't a me. It's just what's happening. It's the experience of separation that makes the emotions and thoughts seem personal, owned by someone. Feelings, sensations owned by someone. That's suffering. My pain or my anger is suffering. Anger or pain is just anger or pain.
There's signifiers, but they carry a signal, right? Like take your hand off the stove or whatever.
Oh yeah. Well, the body does all that naturally. The body does it. Actually, the body is already doing everything. It's the individual that appropriates what's happening as volition. I chose to do that. I want this.
I guess like going back to what I was saying about the students in the auditorium, it's like on one hand you could imagine that by disconnecting from their physical bodies, they were somehow elevating their experience by jumping into this sea of interconnectivity of these egos being intertwined together, these minds and these personalities being joined. But like I said, it doesn't seem to be working because suicide and depression are off the charts.
Well, there's still a me there, right? Because if you think about the way that people are using the internet, it's not like they're not melting themselves away. The internet is still a social contract where you have followers, you have likes, you have all of these signifiers of the success of your embodiment of some persona. And so it becomes much more difficult because it's quantified and codified in a way that it isn't in person. Right? You might be able to get some feeling of somebody's charisma or the feeling of somebody being cool or the feeling of somebody being really functional that you aspire or admire. But on the internet, it's laid bare. There's this post got 1,000 likes and yours got 0. That's enough for you to be able to have a crisis, I think.
Have you seen Century of the Self by Adam Curtis?
I haven't.
Are you aware of the story of the construction of the public relations industry in the West in any sense?
No.
I mean, it was an entirely fabricated industry where they essentially, Ed Bernays, who was, I believe, a nephew of Freud, took the Freudian analysis and basically realized that if you gave people the sense of identity with the products that they were purchasing, that you could up your sales by an extraordinary amount. And there's an argument to be made that that's driven, the industrial technological rise that we've seen happen. And yet the argument is fundamentally that the self, this identification of the self, became highlighted as a fiction in a way that it wasn't before. That of course people were still had, personalities and all these things after the Garden of Eden moment when we stopped being chimps. But this need to put yourself next to other people was really cranked up to the next level in the last century.
Mm.
And so that might be what's accelerating people's suffering, because you say that you think that it's perhaps getting worse.
Oh, it seems to. I mean, if you look at the world, the discontent seems to be, more and more.
I thought that you said something really interesting about the way that material security doesn't seem to give people what they want, and so accelerates and exacerbates this cycle.
Yeah. Well, the discontent, it can no longer excuse it. It can no longer hide in the idea that enough money is going to make me happy, or enough sex, or enough food, or enough anything else, because it's also available. And if all of that is satisfied, then it becomes, it has no way to excuse its discontent anymore.
It's interesting because the way that I've come to handle that is to create artificial scarcity so that there is a yearning.
The individual will always sense some sort of lack somewhere. And where this message is coming from is that lack is illusory. It's part of a separate experience of being cast out from paradise.
Well, the way that I perceive it is that, I can eat until my stomach hurts. I can eat because I'm hungry and then continue eating until I've eaten too much. And I'm able to see that the yearning for the food, for the experience of eating, for it being tasty, whatever, is something that cannot be satisfied by eating a lot. Because
the basic fundamental drive for the individual is experience, more experience. It's just more experience. And in the end, it doesn't actually care what that is. Of course, it would prefer to have a better experience, but any experience is better than no experience.
Sure. And so I think the challenge is to figure out how to orient towards experiences that generate less suffering.
Well, that the individual will do that. The body will do that naturally. The individual interferes with that because it prefers what it knows to what it doesn't know. So even if it's in activities that are hurtful or harmful, it would prefer to do that than to do something it doesn't know.
It's also a culturally produced identity. And so, right?
Conditioning.
Yeah. So like the
Hmm.
self is not an identity that is created in a vacuum. It is shaped and molded by everyone around it.
Well, there's conditioning that still is in the body, even if there isn't anyone that has it.
When what
The
are,
individual, the individual is the appropriation of everything. It's an added on experiencer to the natural appearance that has the experience that everything is it. It's all my experience.
well, that is the limit of my perception is the limit of my experience.
For the individual, that's true.
And so when you go outside of the individual or you separate yourself from the individual, how does that change
Well, there isn't any limit to anything. There isn't anyone here that's separate from the individual.
And so how do you relate to us through this
No
Zoom screen?
no one relates. There's no responsibility. There's no one doing this. There's just response. And that response is beginningless and endlessness appearing as a response. It's the infinite. It no longer appears limited.
Do you care about the world though? This is what I was like I tried to ask this before, but do you care
Well,
about the
right.
world?
There isn't anyone here that finds any value in what happens in the world.
That's interesting.
There's no value to what appears. It just appears. That doesn't mean that this wouldn't go out and do something that might be seen as positive or negative, but there isn't any extra added on level of value to the continuation or not continuation of the appearance.
There's not there's not anything extra, but there is that question of doing something positive or negative, right?
Well, there isn't actually anything, as I said, would be seen as positive or negative. The sense here is that everything is already perfect.
But
So there isn't any need for it to become something. That seems to arise with that separate experience, that the appearance is somehow lacking. And so there's a drive to become, to improve, to make it into something.
well, let's say that you were dying of hunger.
Yeah.
Is there something lacking?
No.
So is there any reason to send like food aid to war-torn countries?
Or not to. There's no reason to or not to. It either does or it doesn't happen. What we're talking about is an added on value system of the individual that says there's a right and a wrong and a good or a bad, which arises out of being cast out of the Garden of Eden and its idea of how to get back. That's where that comes from.
But you don't believe that there's a path to redemption?
There isn't anyone to redeem. It's already done. The dream of the individual is that something needs to happen for the Garden of Eden or paradise or what is to be needlessly as it is, whole. And that's, again, part of the dream. There isn't anything that could, and nothing ever does happen that brings it about. It already is that way.
But it is a lucid dream that we're all participating in.
I don't know what you mean by lucid dream.
I just mean that I can get up right now and walk out of this room. Like I can make choices and I can change.
Yeah, I don't agree that an individual does that. Here, it seems the brain does that, and the individual appropriates that as the experience of being in control.
But isn't that kind of what I mean when I say I mean my brain, like my disorganization of cells.
There's a clear differentiation. There obviously isn't anyone doing it. There isn't any sort of awareness of a brain doing it either. But it's obviously just simply happening without anyone being in charge, anyone knowing about it. It's just happening, like these words. It just happens. Apparently.
It's interesting because I feel like I have a bunch of people living inside of me. And so, have you heard of internal
Sounds
family?
crowded.
It's also very comforting because there's these different aspects of me that I've picked up over the course of my life, and they represent the different wills and desires towards varying goals. There's not a unified I of like, this is what I want.
Right.
There's the collection of, this is what I want in this circumstance, this is what I want in that circumstance, it's very relational. Like I was talking about my family, like the way that my world works changes significantly when somebody comes into it. So when I'm alone, it's very different than when Shiloh's around, than when family's around, than when friends are around. And so there's not a single unified I. Like these I's shift and flow.
No, it's schizophrenic, yeah.
It is.
It is. That's the experience of it.
I don't know that Shiloh necessarily has that experience, though, because Shiloh has maybe the most centered and dedicated I of anyone that I've ever met in my entire life. This is a man who, in no matter what room he's in, is like, no, this is my thing. And so I don't think that it's a universal experience, but I see there being a relational identity that informs my actions on the basis of network effects. Because I recognize that everyone is an appearance of the that, and I have a resonant influence on their appearance. And so my network of good and bad isn't associated with a desire to be rewarded by a return to the garden. It is a desire to be rewarded with a harmonious environment. And that requires the sensing of others and their appearances. And I think that it works okay. Like I'm not particularly attached to the I, but I'm still able to work on things with other people that fulfill us and create meaning, simply in the relation. And so it's possible to have a definition of good and bad that's not rooted in the Garden of Eden, I think. But rooted in harmony. Because if everything is just an experience of the that, you can have a harmonious appearance or you can have a disharmonious experience. And is harmony not better than disharmony?
No.
But why do you experience music that's harmonious as being more pleasant than disharmonious? When somebody's
just a pleasant feeling. It's not better or worse. The individual, because everything seems to be real to it, wants to have a better experience. It constantly drives for a better experience.
Well, what if it's not a better experience? What if it's just a good experience?
Yeah. Okay. So it constantly drives.
I'm not saying, because what I mean is not a gooder experience or a better experience, but just like a pleasant one.
Yeah. So it drives for a pleasant experience.
And is that not good?
No, there isn't any good or bad. That's what happens in the separate reality.
Well, the reality is not totally separate because it's informed by the appearance of the that. And so it is part of the that.
It's not informed by it. It is it. There's no separation. It is it.
I don't think it's like a Plato's cave type of thing.
I don't, I've heard of Plato's cave and his balls or circles of reality or real objects, but I don't remember much of it.
Well, Plato's cave is that there's a fire, and in front of the fire there are people with shadow puppets, and there's a group of people that are staring at the wall, and so they see the shadow puppets. And the shadow puppets are the appearance of the real, but the real is actually the puppets themselves and the people that are moving them around. And so that's when I say that it's the appearance of the real is intimately related to the real, is that the confirmation of the real gives rise to the appearance, and so they are related to one another.
Right. And I'm just saying they're not related, it's the same thing.
Well, if they are, then there wouldn't be different words for them. If they were the
Well,
same thing.
they're two different bodies, but they're both that which can't be said.
Well, they aren't different bodies. That's the
There's
thing.
a body there, and there's a body here, but they're both that which can't be known, appearing as bodies.
Well, the little puppets are the bodies, and there's just shadows on the back wall, which are really
In this case, our appearances, our bodies would be the shadow on the wall, right?
our selves, like our sense of self, right? I guess I'm just like, I don't have any illusions about the fact that the construct of myself is, on one hand, a construct, right? It's just this project that I'm working on.
Mm.
But it seems just like a really useful project to work on at the same time.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so I don't really have any disconnect with the point that's being made here. It seems like it can be both true and that the shadows are very important to pay attention to at the same time.
Mm.
Yeah, I just don't know what else I would do with my time.
Mm.
I'm like, what would I do if I wasn't working on
yourself?
Yeah. In relation to others.
Right.
Right, because I think
But that's what makes yourself, in my opinion, well, I'll just speak for myself, but that's what makes myself, that's the ideal self, in my sense, is one that's useful to the people around them.
Mm.
And I can only do that by making myself stronger and kinder and funnier and all of these things, right? That I would, at any given moment in time, identify with my sense of self.
Yeah. And if there is no self, why work on it? Why make it?
Totally. Absolutely.
But doesn't that just give people license to be big fat jerks?
Well, if there were free will, and that was the reason that people were acting the way they were, then that would be the assumption. But no one's doing anything already.
So it's
what
really
you guys are describing is already, it's just what's happening. The individual comes in, or the separate experience comes in and says, I'm doing it. And it's good that I'm doing it.
But isn't that the perception of work? Like, if it was just happening, I wouldn't have to work at it.
Well, you aren't working at it. There isn't anyone working at it, but working at it seems to happen.
As opposed to not seeming to happen.
Oh, or not happening. It's not relevant, really.
Well, so if there is no self and there is no point in working on the self, then there is no point in trying to be different than you are.
Absolutely.
I think that that's a really, I think that's really dangerous.
Yeah, I know.
And I think that
people say that because they feel like they're in control.
Well, I think that I
There's an
see
individual
people.
that's in control, and that by saying there's no point working on it, the idea is that you're giving license for people to do. The individual's afraid, and so it's afraid of what it calls bad things happening, and so it hears this, and because it has the sense of being in control, it hears this and it says, oh, well, if I'm not in control, then I might, and then it's projected onto others, might do horrible, terrible things.
People
but the individual
do.
isn't in control. But the individual is in control.
You could find yourself living in some, let's say, some
shack.
fictional world where, your society had been infected with a virus, and the virus had essentially reworked the system of governance so that it just served product consumption. It resulted in people being locked in their homes and forced to buy things online, and it resulted in people being forced to take experimental medicines as some hopeful solution to get unchained, right? And in this fictional world, if you just said, well, there's nothing to be done about it, it just is.
But you're not listening. That's not what's being said.
Okay. I'm trying to listen really hard. I'm sorry.
Okay. The suggestion is there already isn't any. And your fictional reality actually sounds like pretty much the way it is.
Oh, no, really? Oh, God. Jeez. That's all the more cause for concern.
I think that we've Shal and I have talked about this a lot in context of corporations. So I think that it's not a particularly mind-boggling statement to say that we live in a society right now that has been overrun by corporate interests over human interests. Is that apparent? Is that an apparent phenomenon?
I appreciate this conversation that you guys have given the time for it, but there's really nothing more for me to say. There's no drive here to sort of delineate the apparent reality in sort of a value system of corporations and children in classrooms looking at mobile phones or not. The message is really simple, and it's pretty much that's the idea of what we're going to talk about here. And the message is that there is simply that which can't be known, appearing as everything. And there's an experience of separation, reflected in that story of being cast out of paradise. There's an experience that seems to be separate from everything, and its basic longing, its deepest longing, is for the end of the experience of separation. And what appears in that context, that apparent context, isn't really relevant. It's all simply that appearing. Anything can happen. It's not relevant. It doesn't relate to each other. It's all that appearing to happen. And
I would agree with that. And I think that the only difference that we have is that I feel like we have a responsibility to the world.
Yeah, and here everything is already that. There isn't any one that could be responsible. That's just the way this. It's obvious here that there is no individual that could possibly be responsible.
It's interesting because I think that mentality has created a host of problems for people that are solvable. And I'm not saying that it's possible to solve the crisis of the separation, because I think that there is an endless desire to return to the womb. I think that there is the desire for things to be easy again, and to give up the pain of living, which is that you cannot fill the want. The want will be there, and the best that you can do is learn to live alongside it in a way by recognizing that the want just is, and that you are formed around it in some way. But we live in dire times. They're better than they ever have been materially. Spiritually, they're left wanting. And I think that the reason that so much is in chaos is because they're left wanting spiritually so badly. Because I look at somebody like, or I look at a corporation that's making Teflon and dumping C4 into the Ohio River and poisoning everybody downstream, and I recognize that the reason that no one takes responsibility for it and stops it from happening is because there is no I there.
I don't know. I don't believe that at all.
Yeah, there's no one. Everyone at the corporation is just like this. The buck doesn't stop here. I'm not responsible for this. I didn't do it.
Yeah, at the end of the day, it's like the shareholders, but the shareholders.
What I'm saying is that there's no one abdicating responsibility. You're saying there's someone abdicating responsibility. I'm saying no one does that.
I'm saying that there's no one who's taking the responsibility. I'm saying that there's no one who's like, it is my job to make sure that we don't poison the people downstream.
Because it's not a human.
What I'm talking about isn't helpful in that sense. It has no intention to change anything or to make a better appearance. It just merely a reflection that the appearance is already complete. Everything that you've described, all of these macro and micro situations that seem to demand a response, is completeness appearing that way. And that is no imposition on it about anything being done or not being done. But there's a huge difference, I would have to say, from the position of the individual feeling like that's wrong and it needs to be made better, or there just being something done or not done about it.
I mean, I'm not sure that we'll be able to get much deeper than this.
No,
what
I
do you
don't
think?
Yeah, I mean, I've from the very beginning, I can recognize the truth in the revelation, but I'm also just, for whatever reasons, extremely personally invested in what happens in the world, and that's where I derive my meaning, and it's going really well for me compared to people who don't have that connection to it and connection to the future and skin in the game of the story of life and the story of humanity. And so, yeah, anyways, I thank you for coming by and talking to us.
Yeah.
It's been definitely it's been an interesting jujitsu situation. I feel like I've been near choked out a few times, and I thank you very much for challenging us.
Well, thanks for inviting me.
It was a pleasure. Thank you so
All right,
much.
have a great rest of your day, sir.
You too.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.